Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nighthawk from Sentient Gaming Bytes, and welcome back to a show that I've wanted to relaunch for quite a while now. We're back to the PBE Weekly Overview. It's a show where we'll be looking at all the changes over the week in PBE and kind of giving you a brief overview of what's happened so you don't have to read through all these Surrender at 20 articles yourself. We thought that this week would be a pretty good week to launch it because the mid-year Mage update just hit PBE and there are a lot of changes that people might not have the time to read over. So today we're going to go over all the new stuff on the PBE that happened this week. Buffs and nerfs, new skins, objective changes such as the large changes to Dragons, Rift Herald, Tower, and Baron, and then all the Mage reworks such as Malzahar, Brand, Vladimir, Cassiopeia, etc. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover the buffs and nerfs of this week's PBE cycle. We're not going to go super in-depth, but we've made a little infographic so you can see the basic changes. The new skins that we see this week are Iron Inquisitor Kael, Cursed Revenant Nocturne, and Black Scourge Singed. We'll link the skin spotlights videos in the description if you want to have a better look at those skins. The biggest change this week, in my opinion, is probably the dragons. Old Dragon is gone now, and there's 5 different elemental dragons that spawn on Summoner's Rift instead. Each of them give a unique buff to your team that can benefit you in different ways. For example, Infernal Dragon increases your team's power by buffing your AP and AD, aiding you in fighting and dueling. Ocean Dragon, every few seconds, it restores a large amount of your missing health and mana, allowing your team to siege and turtle better. Mountain Dragon boosts damage against towers and epic monsters, boosting your ability to take objectives quickly. And Cloud Dragon gives your team out-of-combat movement speed, allowing for quicker rotations around the map. In the first 35 minutes of the game, the 4 elemental dragons will spawn in the pit. While spawn rotation is random, the same dragon can spawn additional times, granting you additional stacks on their buff. The next dragon spawn will be indicated by a symbol on the side of the dragon wall, so you'll never be caught off guard. After 35 minutes, only the Elder Dragon can spawn. The Elder Dragon works similar to the 5th dragon on live, massively buffing your current dragon buffs by a huge percentage, and granting true damage over time on hit. While all the previous buffs are permanent, Elder Dragons has a small duration to enforce huge power spikes. Along with all the dragon changes, we see a few tweaks to Rift Herald. In order to combat soloing Rift Herald early, everyone's favorite mutated crab got a huge buff and a new effect. That will surely cause many skirmishes in the future. The new buff that it grants, Glimpse of the Void, lasts 20 minutes and persists through deaths. It works on a charge system similar to Static Shiv. While there are no allies nearby, you take less damage from enemy champions and you passively generate these stacks of corruption. At 100 stacks, when you auto-attack something, all the corruption stacks are discharged, dealing bonus magic damage to champions, towers, minions, and monsters. Moving on, we have some small tweaks to red and blue buffs. Both the buffs have had their duration lowered and are also receiving a few number tweaks. Red buff has also been rescaled to benefit players with higher attack speed. It also grants a Warmogs-like effect, massively increasing health regen while out of combat with champions and epic monsters. While we're on the subject of jungling, let's take a look at these new minimap timers Riot has implemented. For buff camps and epic monsters, a minimap timer will now appear 60 seconds before that monster spawns, regardless of your team's vision on the said camp. That means that even if the enemy jungler did not see you taking your buffs, 4 minutes later an hourglass will pop up on his map and he'll know it's coming back soon. This is going to allow for a lot more counter jungling attempts by enemy junglers, so be careful and always ward your camps. I also want to quickly point out that Baron buff duration has been increased in order to maintain its effectiveness and make sure it's still an important objective with the new dragon changes. Now here's a change that I thought was pretty interesting, even though it didn't get a lot of attention. Turret damage ramps up quicker, meaning if you stand under it you're going to die a lot faster. They also have more effective health, making them more defensible throughout the game. In the same light, death timers mid to late game have been reduced to make sure that deaths don't punish your team quite as much, resulting in less games being won over one big team fight. That's pretty much it for all the map and objective changes. Now let's get into the real meat of the patch. It's the mid-year Mage update. So let's take a look at all the champions that got reworked in the new patch, like Brand, Cassiopeia, Malzahar, Vladimir, and Swain. There's also a lot more champions that got smaller tweaks to them. We're going to cover those, but not as in-depth as these 5 champions. Let's start out with a simple one. Brand. Brand's kit has been kind of tweaked to support a more AoE playstyle while reducing his ability to nuke down single targets. His passive has also been changed to include another 3-hit passive, so if you damage a target 3 times with spells, an AoE explosion occurs around them after a couple seconds. This can cause a chain reaction as the explosion counts towards the stacks. Furthermore, his ult now heavily prioritizes champions, meaning that you shouldn't lose a lot of damage late game if you're ulting a guy in the minion wave. Up next we have Cassiopeia. She's received a bunch of changes to her kit, starting with a new passive. Since snakes don't have feet, she can no longer purchase boosts and instead gains a movement speed per level. At 18, you actually slither faster than your Swifty-wearing friends. Her W has also received some big changes, where it used to be a little tiny pool that kind of spread out. Now it's like a big AoE line that damages and slows enemies that are inside it, and when they're inside the area affected by it, they cannot use movement abilities, including dashes and blinks. This means no flashing out. This can only be cast at a maximum range, so it reduces the OP-ness of the king, but it still makes it a really good ability for catching out teams when they're trying to escape. Now let's look at her E. It used to be this ability where you could cast it on a poisoned champion and it would instantly reset, giving you kind of a chain as long as the target was poisoned, but now it's got a really low flat cooldown, and the damage and self-healing is now increased if you're casting it on a poisoned champion. So you still need to poison the champion to probably get a kill, but it's not a useless ability if you don't poison the champion. Moving on, we have Malzahar. Malzahar now has a new passive where after several seconds of not taking direct damage, he enters a Void Shift, where he has huge damage resistance and spell immunity. This effect lingers for about a second after he takes damage, so it basically nullifies surprise bursts from champions like Annie. His W has also been reworked completely. It now spawns a Voidling that attacks anything near it. When attacking a large champion or monster, the first attack will generate another Voidling, resulting in kind of like a infinite chain reaction of Voidlings for a few seconds. The duration of the spawn Voidling is linked to the original, meaning that it won't last indefinitely though, but it's still very useful in taking large objectives like Dragon and Blue Buff. Lastly, we have his ult, and what they did here was they kind of combined his ult and his old W, so when you click on a target, it suppresses them for a couple seconds, and it creates a null zone around them, dealing % health damage on them and then anything in that null zone. So it kind of is a nice new change where you aren't just nuking a single target, you're kind of doing some AoE damage, but I think it's still basically the same ability. Next we come to Vladimir, the underappreciated Crimson Reaper. He now scales better with health due to a tweaked passive, and in exchange, the ability power that he gets grants him less health than before. This could make him into the health stacking mage tank that he was meant to be. They also tweaked his Q just a little bit. After 2 successful casts, he enters this Blood Rage state where he gets a little bit of a move speed, and if he Qs somebody within the time period, it does a lot more damage and heals him for more. His E has been kind of worked into an AoE explosion around him. You charge it up for a couple seconds, and the longer you charge it, the more damage it does. And lastly, we come to Swain. Swain's Raven now assumes a much larger role in his kit. With his Q, Swain can position the Raven in a small area where it will attack enemies around it, similar to the Wolf in Kindred's W. Enemies affected by his E are also prioritized. Furthermore, his ult has been slightly changed to deal more damage to multiple targets and less to single targets. Alright, now let's take a look at the smaller tweaks that Riot did to a few of these champions. Vel'Koz now does true damage on his ult against targets that have been deconstructed. Zyra's kit is tweaked a little bit to have more interaction with her plants in order to do more damage. Fiddle's new passive is where he gains a burst of movement speed after he stands still for a couple seconds. Annie's E now has flat damage reduction on it, and Tibbers will do more damage while it's attacking enemies than when it was just being cast. Singer's passive has been tweaked to allow a lot more ball manipulation, resulting in higher damage ults and more CC all around. Vigor's passive now scales off of hitting enemy champions as well as killing CS. His ultimate now no longer scales off his target's AP, but it does increase damage based on their missing health. Xerath has more charges on his ult the more levels you put into it. Right now it's 3, 4, 5 based on the level of the ultimate. Zig's W can now instantly destroy a turret at low health, and Anivia's ult starts smaller and scales up in size based on how long it's been active. Now let's look at the second big update, the item changes. With the mid-year mage update, lots of items have been reworked to support new playstyles. First of all, Grievous Wounds now reduces all healing effects again instead of just self-healing. This should stop champions like Soraka from being so oppressive. Will of the Ancients has been completely removed from the game, and Spellvamp has been removed from all previous items. Spellvamp is no longer a thing, it's been replaced by the damage dealt vamp that's on Death Stance and Gunblade. So it's still kind of a thing, but they didn't like Spellvamp as it was, so they decided to just remove it and replace it with this kind of Omni-Vamp kind of thing. Boots enchantments were also removed, since Home Guard automatically applies to everyone at 20 minutes. Riot wasn't happy with the current enchantments, because they didn't think there was enough variety, so they just removed all boot enchantments whatsoever. Abyssal Scepter is now less of a Russian lane to kill somebody item. It gives less AP and more MR, and a scaling MR debuff for its enemies, so it doesn't do as much if you build it early. Tear of the Goddess and all the items built out of it no longer have mana regen, and now refund a portion of all mana spent instead. Athene's and Holy Grail has been changed to no longer have % mana regen. Now when your health is lower than your mana, you gain health regen, and vice versa. Also, when you take damage, you gain blood charges. These charges augment your healing and damage. Catalyst's old passive has been removed, and its new passive is a percentage of the damage taken from champions is gained back as mana, and when you spend mana, a percentage of that mana spent is gained back as health. To the dismay of junglers and to the pleasure of laners, Devourer has now been removed. It's been replaced with Blood Razor, whose basic attacks deal a percentage of the target's maximum health as bonus physical damage on hit, with a maximum against monsters and minions, of course. Don't fret too much though, because the passive sort of lives on in the new Guinsoo's Rageblade. After 6 stacks on Rageblade generated by auto-attacking, you activate Guinsoo's Rage, which makes every other basic attack trigger an on-hit effect, just like the old Devourer. Like I said earlier, Hextech Revolver no longer has Spell Vamp on it, but now has a passive where about every half minute, your next auto-attacking as a champion will do additional damage. Morellonomicon no longer has mana regen, but now gives flat mana instead. It has more AP, and kills and assists restore 20% of your maximum mana. Rod of Ages is cheaper, gives less AP and mana, and has Catalyst's new passive. Sonya's Hourglass has less AP now, gives 10% CDR, and has a longer active cooldown. Hunter's Machete now gives even more XP on monster kill because the base jungle XP is down. Overall, this should reduce the reward of taking a camp as a laner early in the game. And last but not least, pink wards now have 4 health instead of 5, meaning Graves and Jhin should be able to take them much easier. Moving on, we have some shiny new items. First off, we have Hextech GLP-800. It's a new item that's built out of Hextech Revolver and Catalyst. It gives health, mana, and AP, and has the Catalyst passive built in. It also has an active that sprays icy bolts out in an arc, damaging and slowing enemies that were hit. Next, we see Hextech Protobelt-01. It's built out of a Hextech Revolver and a Kindle Gem. It gives health, AP, and cooldown reduction. It has an active that dashes you forward a small distance and fires out bolts in an arc. Don't worry though, the active can't go over walls. And lastly, we have Lost Chapter, which is sort of a mid-grade item. It's built from an Amplifying Tome and a Sapphire Crystal. It gives mana and AP, and when you level up, it restores a portion of your maximum mana. That's it for this week. I hope you're all happy with the incoming changes. Check out surrenderat20.net for more detailed information on everything I talked about today, and tune in next week to stay up to date with all the PBE changes. This is Nighthawk from Essential Gaming Bytes signing out.